The kingdom of Arendelle stood between mountains and wide rivers. It was a land filled with old castles, iron gates, and people who worked hard to keep life moving. The city was busy with markets, soldiers training, and bells that rang every morning. In the middle of it all stood the palace, built of white stone that caught the light of the sun. Inside that palace lived Queen Alara, a ruler known for her strength and wisdom. But she often carried heavy thoughts in her heart. Alara was not like the stories told about queens in songs. She was tall, with long golden hair, and she wore a crown that shone bright in the light. Many called her beautiful, but she did not believe them. She saw scars on her arms from battles and lines on her face from years of worry. When she looked in the mirror, she did not see what the people saw. She saw someone tired and worn. This thought stayed with her, even when she smiled before her people. On the training grounds of the palace, soldiers worked every day with their swords and shields. Among them was Ethan, a young man from the colonies far away. He was not from noble blood, but his courage had brought him into the queen's service. He was strong, with dark hair and steady eyes, and he carried himself with calm that many noticed. While other soldiers boasted of their power, Ethan stayed quiet, always ready to help without asking for praise. The queen often watched the training from the balcony of the palace. She would see Ethan moving among the others, not the fastest or the strongest, but always steady, never afraid. There was something about him that made her wonder why he seemed so sure of himself when she, a queen, was full of doubt. She asked him to walk with her many times, to hear his thoughts, and she found comfort in his simple words. He did not bow with fear or speak with false praise. He spoke as if she was not only a queen, but also a woman who carried a heavy weight. One evening, as the sun set behind the towers of the palace, Alara stood in her chamber. The golden light fell on her face, and the crown on her head felt heavier than ever. She called for Ethan, and when he entered, she removed her crown and placed it on the table. She looked at him with eyes that carried sadness. Her voice was steady but quiet when she spoke. "Why do you call me beautiful, Ethan? When I look at myself, I see scars. I see weakness. I see someone who is not worthy of such words." Ethan looked at her for a moment. The room was silent, except for the sound of the wind moving the curtains. He did not rush to speak. He stepped closer, and his eyes did not look away from hers. He saw the lines she spoke of, the marks of years of struggle, but he also saw the strength that no mirror could show. The queen waited, expecting him to answer with words like all others did, words she could not believe. But Ethan only smiled, a small smile that carried more meaning than 1,000 speeches. It was a smile that said he saw her for who she was, not for how she judged herself. It was a smile that told her she was more than scars, more than her doubts. It was a smile that made her chest feel lighter, even if only for a moment. That night, after Ethan left the chamber, Alara sat alone by the window. The city lights glowed below, and the sound of voices from the streets reached her ears. She thought about his smile. She thought about how a simple man, without noble name or golden crown, could make her question the way she had seen herself for so long. For the first time in many years, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the people who called her beautiful were not lying. And with that thought, she rested, waiting for the battles yet to come. The next morning, the palace came alive with the sound of horns. Messengers rushed through the halls carrying news from the borders. The empire to the east had begun to move its armies closer, and fear spread quickly among the council. The lords and generals gathered in the great hall to speak of war, but their voices rose in anger and worry. Some wanted to hide behind the walls of Arendelle, while others demanded they strike first. Queen Alara sat at the head of the long table, her hands folded, listening to every word, though her mind was far from calm. Ethan stood along the wall with the guards, his eyes steady on the queen. He could see the weight pressing down on her shoulders. She held her crown high before the council, but he knew her heart carried doubt. When the voices of the lords grew louder, Alara lifted her hand, and silence fell over the hall. Her voice was strong when she spoke. "We will not hide," she said. "We'll defend our land, but we will not throw our people into blind war. We will stand with courage, but we will use wisdom, not fear." The hall grew quiet, though some lords still looked uneasy. The queen ended the council and left the chamber, her steps steady, though her heart still wrestled inside. Outside the hall, she walked through the gardens, where the roses grew in neat rows. Ethan followed at a distance until she turned and called for him. "You heard them," Alara said, as she looked at the flowers. "They see me as a symbol, but not as a person. They do not know how heavy this crown feels. They do not know how much I doubt myself." Ethan stepped closer, his voice calm. "They do not have to know, my queen. It is enough that you do. You carry their fear, so they do not have to. That is why they follow you." Alara looked at him with tired eyes. "And yet I ask myself again, why do you call me beautiful when I am not what they see? I am a woman filled with scars, with fears, with weakness." Ethan did not look away. He let the silence stay between them for a moment before he spoke. "Because beauty is not without scars. Beauty is the strength to walk forward even when the road is broken. Beauty is the heart that carries others when they cannot stand. I have seen that in you. That is why I smile when you ask me." Alara felt her chest grow heavy, yet lighter at the same time. His words did not feel like the empty praises of courtiers. They felt true, spoken from someone who had nothing to gain and nothing to lose. She turned her face back to the garden, but his words stayed with her. That evening, the queen ordered the soldiers to prepare the defenses. The people of Arendelle worked side by side, carrying stones to strengthen the walls, sharpening weapons, and gathering supplies. Ethan joined the soldiers on the training field, his movements steady and sure. He did not stand out as the strongest, but his calm presence gave others confidence. When a young soldier dropped his weapon in fear, Ethan picked it up, placed it back in the boy's hand, and said, "Hold it steady. You are stronger than you believe." The boy nodded, his hands no longer shaking. Many saw this and spoke quietly of Ethan's way of giving courage without shouting, without pride. The queen heard of it too, and though she said nothing, she thought of his quiet strength. Later that night, Alara stood at her window again, looking at the torches burning along the city walls. She thought of the days ahead, of battles that could decide the fate of her kingdom. She thought of the fear that lived in her heart. But she also thought of Ethan's smile, of his words, and of how he stood firm when so many faltered. For the first time in many nights, she allowed herself to rest with a little peace. Outside, the sound of soldiers training echoed in the night, a promise that Arendelle would not fall without a fight. The days passed quickly as the threat from the east grew closer. Scouts returned with news that the enemy army was larger than expected, with iron machines and soldiers who showed no mercy. The council grew restless again, but Queen Alara did not let fear control her. She stood each morning with her people, walking the walls, speaking with the workers, and giving orders with calm strength. Though she felt doubt inside, she never let it show on her face. She knew her people needed to see her strong. Ethan was always nearby, silent but steady, carried no title, yet many soldiers began to trust him. They saw the way he trained without complaint, the way he spoke with quiet confidence, and the way he never treated anyone as less. When fear spread among the younger men, they looked to Ethan, and his calm gave them courage. He never boasted, never shouted, but his presence was enough to remind them that they were not alone. One evening, Alara called Ethan to the war room. Maps were spread across the table, showing rivers, hills, and roads that led to the border. Candles burned low, casting long shadows on the walls. She stood over the maps with her generals, who argued about where to place the armies. Some wanted to hold the river, others wanted to guard the mountain pass. Their voices grew louder, each man certain of his own wisdom. Alara raised her hand for silence, then turned to Ethan. "You have seen war from the eyes of a soldier, not from the seat of a throne," she said. "What do you see here?" The generals frowned, but they stayed silent. Ethan stepped forward, studying the maps. He pointed to the valley, where the enemy would likely march. "If they come through here, they will feel safe. The ground is wide and open, but it makes them easy to see. We wait in the hills on both sides. We can strike when they least expect it. The enemy will be trapped between us and the river." The room grew quiet. The generals looked at each other, surprised that a soldier without rank had spoken with such clear thought. Alara studied him carefully, then nodded. "We will prepare the hills. Your words carry truth." Later, when the generals left the chamber, Alara remained with Ethan. She looked at him closely. "You speak with the mind of a leader, yet you call yourself only a soldier." I am what I have always been, Ethan replied. But sometimes it takes a soldier to see what a leader cannot. Alara gave a faint smile, though her eyes held sadness. I am a queen, yet I often cannot see what I am meant to be. I see only the flaws, the marks of failure. Tell me, Ethan, why do you still call me beautiful when I feel so far from it? He looked at her with steady eyes, because beauty is not in what you see in the mirror. Beauty is in the way you stand when all others fall. Beauty is in the courage to hold this kingdom together when it would break without you. You may doubt yourself, but I do not. And I will not stop smiling when you ask me this. Her heart stirred at his words, though she tried to hide it. She turned back to the maps, but the warmth of his smile stayed with her. For the first time, she wondered if he was right, if beauty was something more than a face without scars. Thus, as the night grew deep, the queen walked alone through the halls of the palace. The torches flickered against the stone and her footsteps echoed softly. She thought of the battles to come, of the blood that would be spilled, and of the heavy crown she wore. Yet in her thoughts was also Ethan, the soldier who spoke truth without fear, who smiled when she doubted herself. In that quiet moment, she began to feel a strength that was not her own, but shared, as if his faith had become a part of her. Outside the palace walls, the torches of the army burned bright against the night sky. The enemy was drawing near, and soon the fate of Arendelle would be decided. But for now, in the silence of the halls, Queen Alara felt a little less alone. The morning of battle came with a red sky. The air was heavy, and the sound of drums echoed through the hills. The enemy had crossed the river and marched toward the valley. Dust rose behind their army as they came in endless lines, shields shining and banners high. From the hills above, the soldiers of Arendelle waited, their armor ready, their weapons tight in their hands. Queen Alara rode among them on a white horse, her golden crown shining in the dim light. Her face was calm, though her heart pounded inside. She knew the eyes of every soldier were upon her. Ethan stood at her side, holding his sword. He wore no crown, no mark of rank, but the soldiers looked to him with the same trust they gave their queen. He had trained with them, marched with them, and shared their fear. Now, as the enemy drew closer, his steady presence gave them courage. He met their eyes and nodded, reminding them that they were not alone. The enemy entered the valley with loud cries, certain of their strength. Their leaders rode at the front, pointing their spears toward the hills. But as the first wave marched forward, the trap was set. At Elara's signal, horns blasted from both sides. Arendelle's soldiers charged down from the hills, shields locked, swords raised. The enemy was caught between the river at their back and the steel of Alara's army in front. The clash was loud and fierce. Steel struck steel, shields broke, and cries of war filled the air. Alara fought at the front, her sword flashing in the sunlight, and did not hide behind her guards. She led the charge, striking down enemies with her own hands. Her armor bore scratches and dents, but she pressed on, her voice rising above the chaos. For Arendelle, she cried, and her soldiers roared with her. Ethan fought close beside her, moving with steady power. He was not the strongest on the field, but his calm never broke. When young soldiers faltered, he stood with them, covering their shields, lifting them to their feet. His blade was sharp, but it was his spirit that carried others through the storm. Every time Alara glanced toward him, she saw him standing firm, his face steady, his eyes full of strength. The battle raged for hours. The enemy pushed hard, their numbers great, but the ground favored Arendelle. From the hills, archers rained arrows into the valley. The enemy struggled to move, trapped between river and stone. Slowly, their strength began to break. Their cries grew weaker as the soldiers of Arendelle pressed forward, step by step. At one moment, the enemy's leader broke through the lines and charged straight toward Alara. His weapon was raised, his eyes fierce. For a heartbeat, time seemed to slow. But before the blow could fall, Ethan stepped in front of the queen. Steel clashed as he blocked the strike. The fight was fierce, sparks flying as their swords met again and again. With one final swing, Ethan struck the enemy leader down. The sight of their commander falling shook the enemy ranks, and their cries turned to fear. Alara raised her sword high, her voice cutting through the air. They fall. Stand strong, and victory is ours. Her soldiers answered with a roar, pushing forward with new strength. The enemy began to retreat, their lines breaking, their courage gone. One by one, they threw down their weapons and fled across the river, chased by the echoes of Arendel's horns. When the battle ended, the valley was silent except for the moans of the wounded. Smoke rose from broken weapons and shattered shields. Elara stood among her soldiers, her crown dented, her armor stained, but her spirit unbroken. She looked at Ethan, who stood near her, his sword lowered, his chest rising and falling with heavy breath. Their eyes met, and she saw again the smile he had given her before, quiet and steady. The soldiers began to cheer, raising their swords high. They shouted the queen's name, their voices filling the sky. But Elara did not look at the crown on her head, or the voices of the crowd. She looked at the man who had stood beside her, who had smiled when she doubted, and who had saved her life without fear. For the first time, she felt the weight of her scars lift, replaced with something stronger than pride. It was the knowledge that she was not alone, and that beauty was not what she saw in the mirror, but what she carried in her heart when she stood with her people. The battle was over, but the land still carried the scars of war. The valley was quiet now, filled with broken weapons, torn banners, and the smell of smoke. The soldiers of Arendelle began to gather the wounded, carry the fallen, and repair what they could. Queen Elara walked among them, her armor scratched and heavy, yet her steps were steady. She stopped to speak to the men and women who had fought for her, thanking them with her own voice. To them, she was not just a ruler on a throne, but a leader who stood at their side. Ethan moved through the field as well, helping lift stones, carrying water, and tending to those who could not walk. He did not look for praise, but many eyes followed him with quiet respect. Word spread quickly of how he had stood before the enemy leader to shield the queen. Some called him brave, others called him foolish, but to those who saw it, his courage gave them hope. Days later, the city welcomed its soldiers back. Bells rang from the towers and the streets filled with people holding flowers and banners. Children ran beside the soldiers and families wept with joy as they embraced their loved ones. At the front of the march rode Queen Elara, her crown shining once again, though still marked with the dents of battle. She did not hide those marks, for they told the story of what her people had endured. At her side walked Ethan, not on a horse, not in grand clothes, but with the same calm strength that had carried him through every trial. Inside the palace, the council gathered once more. This time, there were no angry voices, no arguments filled with fear. The lords bowed deeply, giving thanks to their queen. They praised her courage and the victory that had saved Arendelle. But Elara did not stand alone in the light of their words. She called Ethan forward, and though he looked uneasy under so many eyes, she spoke so all could hear. "This man is not of noble blood," she said. "He is not crowned, nor was he born to rule. Yet he has shown a strength that no title can give. He stood when others would fall, smiled when I could not believe. And in his presence I found the truth that beauty is not in the face we wear, but in the heart that refuses to break." The hall was silent for a long moment. Then the lords lowered their heads, not in protest but in respect. Ethan bowed only slightly, his eyes still on the queen. He did not seek their honor, but her words meant more than any title could. That night, Elara stood once more at the window of her chamber. The city below glowed with light, and the sound of laughter rose from the streets. The war was over and her people were safe, but her thoughts were not on the crown or the throne. They were on the man who had stood beside her through it all. When Ethan entered the chamber, she turned to him, her voice softer than it had ever been. "Ethan," she said, "tell me once more. Why do you call me beautiful when I still see the scars, the weakness, the flaws that will never leave me?" He stepped closer, the firelight catching the calm in his eyes. "Because beauty is not in what fades," he said. "It is in what endures. Gus, you carry scars, yes, but they are proof of battles fought and won. You carry fear, but still you walk forward. That is beauty, Elara. That is why I will always smile when I look at you." Her breath caught, and for a long moment she could not speak. She had heard countless words of praise from nobles, poets, and singers, but none had touched her as deeply as the truth spoken by this soldier. For the first time, she believed. She was not beautiful because of her crown, nor because of the words of her court. She was beautiful because she endured, because she stood, because she led. As the night grew quiet, Elara stepped closer to Ethan. And though no grand speech was spoken, the silence between them carried more meaning than words could hold. She felt the weight of her crown lessen, not because it had grown lighter, but because she no longer carried it alone. And in that moment, the Queen of Arendelle smiled, not for her people, not for her council, but for herself, at last believing what she had once denied.